space, a brand new chart. For the head and for the heart, it's your journey, your tools.
It's funny, when a car breaks down on the side of the highway, just, billowing smoke from the hood.
Right, the classic disaster scenario.
Yeah, exactly. We don't just stand there yelling at the engine to, try harder. We don't accuse the transmission of lacking moral fortitude.
No, of course not. You'd look ridiculous.
Right. We don't look at a blown radiator and think, well, this car just doesn't have enough discipline to make it to Chicago.
We immediately look for the mechanical failure. We check the oil levels. We test the battery voltage. We look for a cracked serpentine belt.
It's just a strict engineering problem, plain and simple.
Exactly. It becomes a diagnostic process.
But when it comes to human behavior, to our own minds, to, you listening to this right now, we suddenly suffer this collective amnesia and forget that we are also operating a machine.
We really do. We've completely bought into this ultimate modern myth.
We've bought it wholesale. The idea that a lack of motivation or a lack of discipline or an inability to stick to a habit is somehow a deep personal moral failing.
And it's so toxic.
It really is, and I want to shatter that completely today. Relying on pushing through or, trying harder is not just bad advice from a cheesy self-help book. It is anatomically disastrous.
It's the biological equivalent of pouring sand into a gas tank and just, demanding maximum performance.
Yeah, good luck with that.
Right. The physiological reality, the hard clinical data we have right now, it shows that our brains simply are not designed to operate on sheer will.
Which perfectly sets the stage for the mission of today's deep dive. We're calling this mission Setting the Baseline.
I love that framing, setting the baseline.
Thanks. And just a warning up front for everyone listening, we are completely abandoning all that soft, motivational fluff today.
Throwing it right out the window.
Tossing it. We are tossing out toxic positivity. We are entirely discarding that exhausting everything happens for a reason mindset.
Because none of that helps when your biology is actively failing you.
Exactly. It just makes you feel guilty. So instead, we're looking at the human body as a high-performance machine that requires rigid, non-negotiable biological engineering to actually function.
We are fundamentally shifting the paradigm here from psychological negotiation to physiological management.
And to do that, we are looking at an incredibly heavy stack of sources today. We've got clinical neuroscience papers detailing brain metabolism, physiological frameworks for human performance.
Which is fascinating stuff on its own.
Oh, totally. And we've also got cognitive pacing protocols pulled directly from the clinical management of chronic illnesses, specifically long COVID and ME/CFS.
The chronic fatigue data is incredibly relevant for everyone. Yeah.
Right. And we're also pulling heavily from longevity regimens, including the intensely data-driven Brian Johnson Blueprint protocol.
Which is about as highly engineered as a human life can get right now.
It really is. So let's start with the absolute failure of willpower, because everyone listening has felt this.
Oh, everyone. Every single day.
You wake up, you feel highly motivated, you have a kale smoothie, and by 8 p.m. you are making terrible decisions, eating a sleeve of cookies and doom scrolling on your phone for 3 hours.
The classic 8 p.m. collapse.
So what is physically, mechanically happening inside the skull at that exact moment?
Well, to answer that, we have to focus our attention on the prefrontal cortex, or the PFC.
Okay, PFC.
Yeah, specifically the dorsolateral region of the prefrontal cortex. I want you to think of this as your brain's willpower battery.
Like a literal battery.
A literal finite battery. It is the region exclusively responsible for executive control, for complex planning, and crucially for our discussion, overriding your base primitive impulses.
So it's the voice in your head that says, no, we are not buying those shoes online. We are putting that money in savings.
Right, that cognitive override happens right there behind your forehead. But the massive design flaw in how modern society treats the prefrontal cortex.
Because there's always a design flaw.
Exactly. The flaw is that this specific region is an absolute glutton for glucose. It is a massive consumer of metabolic energy, and it is highly, highly susceptible to metabolic fatigue.
Okay, so it burns through fuel incredibly fast.
Extremely fast. Every single time you use it to make a decision, focus your attention on a spreadsheet, or resist a temptation, you are burning through a finite local supply of metabolic fuel.
So when I say at the end of a long Tuesday that my brain feels drained, that's not just a metaphor.
It is a literal depletion of resources. And the story gets much deeper than just running out of gas. It's also about the buildup of toxic exhaust.
Toxic exhaust in the brain.
Yeah. There's a landmark study from the Paris Brain Institute that completely reframed how we understand mental fatigue. They wanted to see what actually happens during strenuous cognitive work over a really long duration.
How did they actually measure that? Because thinking hard seems tough to quantify on a biological level.
Well, they used a technique called magnetic resonance spectroscopy.
Okay, that sounds intense.
It's a highly advanced imaging method. It basically allows researchers to look inside a living brain and actually track the concentration of specific biochemicals and metabolites in real time.
Wow, so they can literally watch the chemistry change as someone is thinking.
Exactly. So they took two groups of participants and gave them cognitive tasks over a grueling 6.5-hour period.
6.5 hours, I'd go crazy.
It was intense. One group got easy tasks like, simple letter matching. The other group got incredibly difficult tasks that constantly required them to update their working memory and exert high executive control,
Basically maxing out the prefrontal cortex.
pushing it right to the red line.
Man, 6.5 hours of intense focus. I'd be ready to throw my computer out a window. What did the spectroscopy actually show happening inside their heads?
Well, the researchers found that the group performing this strenuous cognitive work experienced a significant accumulation of a neurotransmitter called glutamate in the synapses of the lateral prefrontal cortex.
Glutamate, okay, I've heard of that.
Yeah, glutamate is essential. It's the most abundant excitatory neurotransmitter in the vertebrate nervous system. You need it to learn, to form memories, for neuroplasticity.
But I'm guessing there's a limit to how much we want floating around.
A very strict limit. When you use the prefrontal cortex continuously without breaks, you release glutamate into the synaptic clefts
The synaptic cleft
and
speed.
tiny spaces between neurons. You release it faster than the brain's clearance mechanisms, primarily these cells called astrocytes, can sweep it away.
So it just starts pooling up. It's like, well, wait, let me think about how this feels. If my brain is a computer and I have 50 heavy tabs open in my browser, my RAM gets completely eaten up.
That's a great way to picture it.
And the computer starts working so hard that the physical fan kicks on and the laptop gets burning hot on my lap. Is that heat basically the glutamate building up?
That tracks perfectly. The heat is a byproduct of overexertion that eventually threatens the hardware itself.
Right, you don't want your laptop melting.
Exactly. In the brain, excessive glutamate in the synaptic cleft becomes neurotoxic. It causes a condition called excitotoxicity.
Excitotoxicity. That sounds bad.
It's terrible. The receptors on the receiving neurons get overstimulated, which causes massive influxes of calcium ions into the cells.
Okay, what does the calcium do?
If that goes on too long, the calcium triggers enzymes that actually degrade the cell's DNA and proteins. The cell can literally initiate apoptosis,
Wait, apoptosis?
programmed cell death, just from being overstimulated.
Wait. Thinking too hard for too long without a break can actually damage the physical architecture of the brain?
In extreme, unchecked scenarios, yes, glutamate toxicity kills neurons,
That is terrifying.
which is exactly why the brain has evolved an aggressive automatic defense mechanism to prevent that from happening.
Okay, thank God. What is the defense mechanism?
Well, when the Paris Brain Institute researchers saw the glutamate pooling up in the prefrontal cortex, they also observed a radical behavioral shift in the participants.
Like what?
To avert this toxicity, the brain actively downregulates the prefrontal cortex. It physically dials down the power to that region to stop the flow of glutamate.
Oh, I see. It force quits the heavy applications to save the motherboard from melting.
Exactly. And the immediate consequence of the brain forcing the prefrontal cortex offline is that decision-making control is instantly shifted to other parts of the brain,
Which parts?
parts that handle low-cost, low-effort impulses. The researchers proved this by offering the participants economic choices at the end of the 6 hours.
What kind of choices?
They could choose a small amount of money right now or a larger amount of money later.
The classic delayed gratification test.
Right. And the group with the glutamate buildup overwhelmingly chose the immediate small reward. Their brains simply refused to engage the prefrontal cortex to calculate the long-term benefit.
Wow. This completely changes how I view the end of my day. That overwhelming feeling of mental exhaustion where I can't even decide what to make for dinner.
Yeah, that decision fatigue.
That's not me being lazy or lacking character.
Not at all. The subjective feeling of exhaustion is a biological stop signal. It is an evolutionary alarm system designed to protect you from synaptic poisoning.
That is wild.
Advanced EEG mapping confirms this too. When you reach a state of severe mental fatigue, or what psychologists used to call ego depletion.
Oh yeah, ego depletion. I've heard that term.
Right, but now we can see what's actually happening. You can see localized sleep-like slow waves occurring in the awake frontal cortex.
Wait, sleep like waves while you're awake?
Yes. Your brain is essentially putting localized sections of your frontal lobe to sleep while you are walking around, just to force metabolic recovery and clear the glutamate.
Okay, if my prefrontal cortex battery is dead and the brakes on my impulses are disabled to save my neurons from calcium flooding, who is driving the car? I mean, I don't just fall into a coma at 6 p.m. I keep making decisions, usually bad ones.
Well, when the prefrontal cortex is suppressed, power transfers to older, deeper, and far more primitive structures of the brain. The system defaults to ancient survival heuristics.
And I'm guessing those ancient heuristics aren't great at modern problem solving.
They're terrible at it.
Yeah.
And this creates a devastating cascade when you look at the sheer volume of modern life. Anthropological and cognitive estimates suggest modern humans make somewhere between 33,000 to 35,000 discrete decisions every single day.
That number feels absurd. 35,000.
It does, but when you think about it, it's everything.
Yeah, I guess. Snoozing the alarm, what socks to wear, reading an email, drafting a reply.
Deciding what tone to use in the reply.
Oh man, choosing a podcast for the commute, every single one is a calculation.
And without a biological baseline, a set of automated routines that bypass the prefrontal cortex, every single one of those 35,000 decisions is a micro draw on that fragile glucose battery.
So what happens to the rest of my biology when that battery drains before lunch? Because some days, I'm toast by 11 a.m.
Well, your brain interprets the rapid loss of cognitive control as a severe environmental threat. Remember, evolutionarily, if you lost executive function, you were probably about to be eaten.
Right. Not a good situation for an early human.
So the brain panics. It activates the hypothalamus-pituitary-adrenal axis, commonly known as the HPA axis.
The stress response system.
Exactly. This activation floods your entire systemic circulation with cortisol and adrenaline.
Just the act of making too many small, seemingly meaningless decisions at my desk literally throws my central nervous system into a full-blown fight-or-flight response.
Yes. The body doesn't differentiate between the stress of an overflowing inbox and the stress of a physical predator.
That is so unfair.
It is, but under this chronic cortisol exposure, the power dynamic in your brain completely shifts. Cortisol further suppresses the prefrontal cortex, locking it down.
Okay, so it just tightens the padlock on the willpower battery?
And control is handed over to the amygdala, your brain's threat detection and fear center, and also the ventral striatum, which is heavily involved in processing immediate short-term rewards.
Let me make sure I'm getting this. I'm stressed, my brain is scanning the environment for threats, and my ventral striatum is screaming for a quick hit of dopamine just to feel safe.
That is exactly what's happening.
That is the exact recipe for doom-scrolling social media for 2 hours or eating a pint of ice cream. It's self-medication for an exhausted HPA axis.
You're self-medicating a mechanical failure. And the dynamic gets even more destructive when you factor in how our culture tells us to fix our lives.
Oh boy, what do you mean?
Well, the standard advice is always to set massive, transformative goals, like I'm going to lose 50 pounds or I'm going to write a novel this month.
The classic New Year's resolution trap, dream big, push hard.
Exactly. But look at the neuroscience of dreaming big. There is a region in the brain called the anterior cingulate cortex, the ACC.
The ACC, okay.
One of its primary jobs is conflict monitoring. It constantly compares your current reality with your stated goals and expectations.
So it's like a biological auditor.
A very strict auditor. When you set a massive life-altering goal without having a daily automated system in place to support it, the ACC looks at the gigantic chasm between where you are and where you want to be, and it hyperactivates.
It essentially flags a massive goal as a system error.
It interprets that massive gap as a severe environmental discrepancy. So the ACC signals the amygdala, causing another massive cortisol spike.
Oh, come on. So the goal itself is stressing me out chemically.
Yes. You might get a brief, intense, intoxicating high of dopamine when you first visualize crossing the marathon finish line or starting the company, but the clinical data shows that very quickly.
How quickly?
Often within 24 to 48 hours, you experience a rapid, precipitous drop in dopamine, sometimes up to 58% below baseline.
A 58% drop. Why does the brain pull the rug out like that?
Because the ACC calculates the metabolic cost of achieving that massive goal using a depleted prefrontal cortex, and it determines the cost is biologically ruinous.
Oh, wow.
The brain realizes you don't have the energetic resources to get there, so it deliberately shuts off the dopamine supply to kill your motivation and save energy.
The irony is almost painful. The very act of setting a massive, intimidating goal actually triggers a biological stress response that chemically prevents you from achieving it.
It's a physiological catch-22.
We are literally scaring our own dopamine pathways into shutting down.
And because you are now sitting there stressed out, dopamine depleted, and with your prefrontal cortex exhausted from glutamate buildup, your brain relies on what cognitive behavioral therapists call all-or-nothing thinking.
Oh man, I'm so guilty of this.
Most people are.
If I have a plan to eat a perfect diet, right, and I accidentally eat one French fry at lunch, my brain instantly says, well, the whole week is a total failure, the diet is ruined, I might as well order a massive pizza for dinner.
Psychology frames that as a cognitive distortion. But through the lens of neurobiology, it is a vital, necessary defense mechanism.
A defense mechanism. How is ruining my diet defensive?
Because processing nuance, evaluating gray areas, holding conflicting ideas in your mind, and practicing self-compassion, all of that requires immense amounts of glucose and computing power in the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex.
Oh, I see where this is going.
When your brain is stressed and depleted, it simply cannot afford the metabolic overhead to process nuance.
So it defaults to a binary classification, 1 or 0, success or total failure.
It is a cheap, energy-saving metabolic shortcut. It is far less metabolically expensive for your brain to classify the day as a total failure and just give up than it is to engage the prefrontal cortex to analyze the situation.
To actually do the math and say, well, I ate one French fry, which is 15 calories, so I'm still mathematically on track for my health goal.
Exactly. That rationalization costs energy you simply do not have in that moment.
That completely reorients how I view my own failures. The all-or-nothing thinking isn't a character flaw, it's my brain trying to save glucose because I've burned it all up deciding what font to use on a PowerPoint slide.
That's the reality of modern work.
Okay, so we've established the problem. The prefrontal cortex is too fragile, too expensive to run our daily lives, and relying on it leads to glutamate toxicity, a cortisol hijack, and binary thinking.
A total systemic collapse, yes.
How on earth do we function? I mean, we still have to pay taxes, raise kids, and do our jobs.
We have to physically move the control of our daily behavior to a different, cheaper part of the brain. We have to build an automated engine.
And how do we do that?
The target for that offloading is the deep subcortical structures of the brain, specifically the basal ganglia, and a region within it called the striatum.
Let's talk about the geography of this. The prefrontal cortex is on the outer layer, right? The modern part of the brain. The basal ganglia is deeper inside.
Deep in the center of the brain. The basal ganglia govern automated stimulus response behaviors. They operate entirely below the level of conscious awareness.
Okay.
And most importantly, because they are older, more primitive structures, they require minimal glucose and minimal metabolic energy to operate.
So they're like the ultra-efficient eco mode of the brain.
Exactly. When a behavior is governed by the basal ganglia, it feels like second nature. You don't think about doing it, you just execute.
Like driving a car on a route you've taken 1,000 times, you suddenly arrive in your driveway and realize you don't remember the last 4 miles at all.
That is the basal ganglia running the show perfectly.
But the clinical question is, how does a new difficult behavior actually get transferred from the expensive prefrontal cortex to the cheap basal ganglia?
Right. It happens through a neurobiological process called task bracketing.
Task bracketing.
There's some brilliant research out of MIT that mapped exactly how this works.
Walk me through the MIT research, because if we can map this, we can hack it.
Okay, so the MIT researchers were studying habit formation in rodents using a T maze.
Like a maze shaped like a T.
Exactly. The rodents were placed in a maze, a click sound would play, a gate would open, and they had to run down the maze and turn left to find a reward, which, in this case, was chocolate milk.
Wait, chocolate milk? Rats like chocolate milk.
They absolutely love it. It's highly motivating for them.
Now, the researchers implanted microelectrodes deep into the rodent striatum to monitor the firing of individual neurons.
So they are watching the brain build a habit in real time. Precisely. At first, when the maze was new, the neurons in the striatum and the prefrontal cortex were firing continuously. The rats were actively thinking, sniffing, exploring every corner.
They were using their prefrontal cortex battery.
Yes, high glucose burn. But as the rats repeated the maze day after day in the exact same context, the brain started to chunk the behavior into a single automated unit.
Chunking. So task bracketing, like putting parentheses around the entire sequence of running the maze.
What the electrodes revealed was astonishing. Once the habit was formed, the neurons in the striatum began to fire intensely at the very beginning of the routine when that click sound played.
That's the cue.
Right, the cue.
Yeah.
Then the neurons went almost entirely quiet while the rat actually ran the maze.
Really?
Finally, they fired intensely again at the very end when the rat drank the chocolate milk. The reward.
Wait, so during the actual physical execution of the behavior running the maze, the brain was basically silent?
The basal ganglia had packaged the entire sequence into an automated script. It didn't need active monitoring anymore.
It's exactly like writing a software macro.
Oh, that's a perfect analogy.
Right. If I'm doing a repetitive task in a spreadsheet, I don't type out 100 lines of code every single day. I spend the heavy mental energy to write the code once.
You build the habit.
Right. And then I assign it to a single keyboard shortcut, like Control-Shift-M. That shortcut is the cue.
The click sound.
Exactly. The moment I hit those keys, the program runs the entire complex script perfectly in the background, and my conscious mind is completely free to look out the window or talk to a coworker.
That is a flawless translation of task bracketing. The brain is literally writing a macro.
Mm-hmm.
And what makes this so incredibly powerful for human behavior is a concept called insensitivity to reinforcer devaluation.
Oh man, break that down for me. What does reinforcer devaluation mean in practical terms?
So in the MIT study, after the habits were hardwired, the researchers devalued the reward.
Ow!
They gave the rats a mild compound that made them feel slightly nauseous after drinking the chocolate milk.
Oh, sneaky.
Very. The rats learned to hate the chocolate milk. They wouldn't touch it in their cages.
So the motivation to get the reward was gone. Totally dead.
Motivation was at absolute zero. But, and this is the key to setting your baseline, when the researchers put those same rats back in the T-maze and played the click sound,
Don't tell me they ran it.
the rats still ran the maze. They ran the maze, got to the end, and then refused to drink the milk.
Wow.
The environmental cue triggered the macro, and the basal ganglia executed the behavior automatically, completely independent of the rat's current desire or motivation.
That is wild. The cue overpowered their conscious dislike of the reward.
It bypassed motivation entirely.
If we translate that to humans, that means once a morning workout routine or a deep work habit is locked into the striatum, it will execute even if your motivation is zero.
Exactly.
Even if you wake up feeling terrible, you don't need to want to do it. The environment triggers the macro.
That is the true clinical definition of a biological baseline. Behavior completely offloaded to the subcortex, protecting your prefrontal battery.
But I'm not a rat in a maze. How do I actually program this macro into my striatum?
We engineer it using two specific behavioral frameworks: implementation intentions and choice architecture.
Okay, let's start with the first one.
Implementation intentions are basically if-then logic statements. You have to remove all ambiguity.
So no vague goals.
Right. You don't say, I'm going to drink more water.
Yeah.
You say, if my alarm goes off at 6 a.m., then I will immediately drink the 500 milliliters of water sitting on my nightstand.
You are actively hardwiring a specific cue to a specific routine.
Exactly. And choice architecture.
Yeah, what's that?
Choice architecture is the manipulation of your physical environment to make the baseline behavior the path of absolute least metabolic resistance.
Making it the easy option.
You design the environment so that the lazy default choice is the correct choice. You block the bedroom door with your running shoes. You put your phone charger in the kitchen so you physically cannot doom scroll in bed.
You are restructuring the maze so that your striatum only has one logical path to run.
You're engineering the environment to engineer the brain.
Okay, I love this. We are writing macros and changing the environment. But, and this is a massive but, to successfully write these scripts into the basal ganglia, the underlying hardware of the brain has to be structurally sound.
That is the crucial caveat.
Right. I can't install a new operating system on a laptop with a shattered hard drive and a melted battery. Which brings us to the actual non-negotiable physical tools of our minimum viable toolkit.
Structural foundation.
Exactly. And we have to start with the ultimate neuroclearance system, sleep.
Sleep is not a luxury. It is not a pillar of wellness. It is a strict mechanical necessity.
The word non-negotiable really applies here.
It does this. Remember the neurotoxic glutamate we talked about earlier? Pooling in the prefrontal cortex?
Yeah, the stuff melting the hardware.
Right. Sleep is the only known mechanism for clearing that waste.
How does being unconscious actually clear a chemical out of my synapses?
It happens via a fascinating network called the glymphatic system, which was only fully mapped about a decade ago by researchers like Make and Niedergard.
The lymphatic system.
Yeah, it is essentially the brain's macroscopic waste clearance system, and it operates almost exclusively during deep, slow-wave NREM sleep.
What's the actual mechanism? Are there little street sweepers in there?
Close, actually. During deep sleep, the glial cells in your brain, specifically the astrocytes we mentioned, they actually shrink in physical size by up to 60%.
Wait, the brain physically contracts?
On a cellular level, yes.
Right.
And when those spaces widen, cerebrospinal fluid rushes in, washes through the brain tissue, and flushes the accumulated metabolic waste.
So it's like a deep clean.
Exactly. It flushes out the toxic glutamate and even amyloid beta proteins associated with Alzheimer's, pushing it all down into the circulatory system to be processed by the liver.
So if you don't get deep, slow-wave sleep, your brain cells don't shrink, the fluid can't wash through, and the trash literally stays rotting in your brain.
Precisely. You wake up with a prefrontal cortex that is already compromised before the day even starts.
That's horrifying.
It is. To engineer perfect sleep architecture, we have to master the two biological equations that drive sleep: process S and process C.
Let's unpack the equation. What is process S?
Process S represents sleep pressure, driven by a chemical called adenosine.
Adenosine.
Adenosine is a byproduct of cellular metabolism. From the moment you wake up, every time a cell burns ATP for energy, it leaves behind adenosine.
Like exhaust fumes.
Yes. As the day progresses, this adenosine accumulates in the brain. It binds to specific receptors, physically slowing down neural activity and creating that heavy feeling of sleep pressure.
Okay, and this is exactly where the world's favorite drug enters the chat. Caffeine.
Oh, caffeine.
When I drink a double espresso at 3 p.m., I feel like I'm getting a massive wave of energy. But the sources are abundantly clear that this is a complete illusion.
It is a total illusion. Caffeine does not give you energy. It contains zero ATP.
So what is it doing?
Caffeine is a competitive antagonist for adenosine receptors. Its molecular structure is so similar to adenosine that it fits perfectly into the keyholes on the brain cells.
So it plugs the keyhole.
It plugs the receptor, blocking the adenosine from binding, so the adenosine is still floating around in your brain, accumulating. Your brain just can't feel the exhaustion because the sensors are blocked.
That is terrifying. I'm just putting a piece of duct tape over the check engine light, and when the caffeine metabolizes and falls off those receptors,
All of the adenosine that has been waiting in the background rushes the receptors all at once, and you experience a massive, debilitating afternoon crash.
this mechanism perfectly explains one of the most interesting protocols in the Brian Johnson blueprint data and sleep mastery literature in general.
The caffeine delay.
Yes. The protocol dictates that you absolutely must delay your first caffeine intake for 90 to 120 minutes after waking up.
It is so critical.
I've tried this, and let me tell you, staring at the coffee maker for an hour and a half is misery. Why is that specific window so mathematically important?
Because of a biological event called the cortisol awakening response. When you wake up, your body naturally releases a sharp spike of cortisol.
Just to get you going.
Right. And one of the functions of this natural morning stress response is to help clear out the last bits of residual adenosine left over from the night before.
The sleep inertia, the grogginess.
Yes. If you stumble out of bed and drink coffee, the second you open your eyes, you block those adenosine receptors while the overnight adenosine is still in the system.
So you trap it.
You trap the sleep inertia in your brain for the rest of the day.
Unbelievable.
By delaying caffeine for 90 to 120 minutes, you allow the cortisol awakening response to clear the deck. When you finally introduce the caffeine blocker, there is no trapped adenosine, which largely eliminates the 2 p.m. crash.
That is a phenomenal piece of biological leverage. Okay, so that's process S, the adenosine buildup. What is process C?
Process C is your circadian rhythm, your master clock. This clock dictates your core body temperature, your hormone release, and your sleep-wake cycles.
And where is this clock?
The clock itself is a tiny cluster of about 20,000 neurons called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, or SCN, located just above the optic chiasm.
But the SCN is locked inside a dark skull? How does it know what time it is?
It relies on external environmental cues, called zeitgebers, and the most powerful zeitgeber by far is light.
Which brings us to the next non-negotiable tool. Getting 10 to 30 minutes of natural sunlight outside without sunglasses within 30 minutes of waking.
Crucial step.
But looking at a bright phone screen or turning on the kitchen lights doesn't count, right?
No, indoor lighting is nowhere near the lux intensity required. You have specialized cells in your eyes called intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells, or IPRGCs.
Catchy name.
Right. They contain a photopigment called melanopsin, which is highly sensitive to blue wavelength light found in natural morning sunlight.
So the sunlight hits these specific cells in the eye.
And they send a direct electrical signal down the retinohypothalamic tract straight to the SCN clock.
And what does that signal do?
This light signal does two critical things instantly. First, it completely halts the production of melatonin from the pineal gland, eliminating grogginess. Second, it starts a strict 14 to 16-hour biological timer.
A timer for what?
A timer for when melatonin will be released again that night.
Oh, wow.
If you get sunlight in your eyes at 7 a.m., you are biologically programming your body to feel sleepy at 10 p.m. If you skip the morning light, your master clock drifts, your melatonin release becomes chaotic, and your sleep architecture collapses.
And the sources emphasize that this clock requires strict consistency, waking up at the exact same time every single day. The clinical term used in the literature for sleeping in on the weekends is social jet lag.
It's a very accurate term.
Yeah.
Biologically, there is no difference between sleeping in on Saturday and flying across the country.
Really, just from a few hours.
Yes. If you wake up at 6 a.m. Monday through Friday and then sleep until 10:30 a.m. on Saturday, you have physically shifted your body's circadian time zone by 4.5 hours.
You are inducing jet lag without leaving your house.
You confuse the SCN, which means your adenosine pressure in your melatonin timer will not peak at the right time on Sunday night. You will lie awake at midnight, and your Monday is entirely ruined.
The baseline requires strict parameters.
Absolutely.
Speaking of strict parameters, I want to dig into the Brian Johnson protocol specifically regarding core body temperature.
This is a fun one.
The data shows that to initiate sleep, you must drop your core body temperature by 1 to 3 degrees Fahrenheit. Brian Johnson uses temperature-controlled mattresses to achieve this. But for those of us without a $10,000 bed, the protocol suggests keeping the room cool around 63 to 68 degrees.
Which is standard sleep hygiene, yeah.
But the really wild part is the hot shower mechanism.
It sounds completely counterintuitive to the average person. Taking a hot shower to get cold.
I had to read the studies twice to believe it.
It's pure physics and physiology.
Right. Taking a hot shower or bath 60 to 90 minutes before bed causes rapid vasodilation. The hot water draws all your blood away from your core and out to the surface of your skin.
Particular to the glabrous skin on the palms of your hands and the soles of your feet.
Because those areas act as the body's primary thermal radiators.
Exactly. So when you step out of the hot shower into that cool 65-degree bedroom, all the heat radiating from your skin is rapidly dumped into the environment. Your core body temperature plummets dramatically.
You are basically biohacking the thermal switch that triggers deep sleep.
It is a masterful piece of nervous system engineering.
It really is.
And there is one final critical sleep parameter we must discuss, which is central to longevity protocols. The meal timing.
Right.
The baseline protocol dictates stopping all caloric intake at least 4 hours before sleep. Brian Johnson takes this to the extreme, often eating his final meal at 11:00 a.m.
Eating a huge dinner at 8 p.m. and going to sleep at 10:30 p.m. is standard for most people, though. Why is that destroying our baseline?
Because digestion is a massively metabolically intensive process. It requires immense blood flow to the splanchnic circulation in your gut. If your body is busy digesting a large meal, it cannot effectively drop its core temperature. Furthermore, the sheer effort of digestion keeps your resting heart rate elevated.
And Brian Johnson tracks his resting heart rate obsessively, aiming to get it into the low 40s during sleep.
Because a high resting heart rate destroys sleep architecture. It specifically fragments and reduces the time spent in deep, slow-wave NREM sleep.
Which brings us full circle. If you don't get deep sleep, your astrocytes don't shrink, the glymphatic fluid doesn't wash the brain, the neurotoxic glutamate isn't cleared, and your prefrontal cortex is already metabolically bankrupt before you even pour your delayed coffee the next morning.
Everything is mechanically linked.
Yes.
You cannot outmotivate a dirty brain.
Okay, so we've established the clearance system. Sleep sweeps the trash and sets the clock. But during the day, to keep the electrical signals in the brain firing efficiently, we have to look at the physical fluid those signals travel through.
Yes.
Which brings us to the second non-negotiable component of our baseline, neurovascular hydration.
We really have to elevate the conversation here beyond the generic wellness advice of, just drink 8 glasses of water.
Right, because the brain is fundamentally an electrochemical organ.
Exactly. True hydration isn't about the sheer volume of water sitting in your stomach. It is about precise, intracellular electrolyte ratios that allow neurons to conduct electricity.
The clinical data on this is shocking. Just 1 to 2% systemic dehydration, which is a level most people reach by simply sleeping through the night, significantly impairs executive function. And it actually physically alters the shape of the brain.
It does. When you are dehydrated, the brain loses water volume from the intracellular space. It literally shrinks and pulls away from the skull, causing an increase in ventricular volume.
That sounds incredibly painful.
Well, it creates a state of neurobehavioral dissociation.
What does that mean for the person sitting at their desk?
It means that to you, it just feels like brain fog or a mild headache. But neurologically, because the physical tissue has shrunk, the neural networks are less efficient. The brain has to exert significantly more neuronal activity, burn more glucose, to achieve the exact same baseline cognitive tasks.
So being dehydrated drains the prefrontal battery twice as fast. It's like, imagine an acoustic guitar left in a dry desert environment. The wood shrinks, the neck bows, and the strings lose their tension.
Right.
To get the same note out of it, you have to press down twice as hard and pluck the string with twice the force. The internal friction is exhausting.
That is a fantastic analogy.
Yeah.
And to add to that friction, dehydration spikes the release of a hormone called vasopressin.
Vasopressin, what does that do?
High levels of vasopressin actually disrupt and constrict cerebral blood flow. So you're simultaneously making the brain work harder while starving it of the oxygen it needs to do that work.
Talk about a lose-lose situation. So what is the exact engineering protocol to fix this?
Step 1 is aggressive front-loading. When you wake up, after 8 hours of respiration and insensible fluid loss, you are clinically dehydrated. The protocol mandates consuming 500 milliliters of water immediately upon waking.
Before coffee, before checking your phone, before anything else.
Yes. But plain water isn't enough to restore the electrical gradient.
Right, because plain water dilutes the blood plasma further if not balanced.
Correct. Electrolyte homeostasis requires specific ions to run the sodium-potassium pumps in your cell membranes. The physiological frameworks in our sources target 800 to 1,000 milligrams of sodium, 200 to 400 milligrams of potassium, and 60 to 150 milligrams of magnesium per serving to properly replenish the system.
Okay, hold on. I have to push back here. 1,000 milligrams of sodium first thing in the morning. Everything we hear from standard health advice says sodium is terrible for you, it causes high blood pressure, and we need to reduce salt. Why are we suddenly front-loading a massive dose of sodium?
It's a vital question. Standard health advice targets sedentary populations consuming highly processed diets loaded with hidden salt and refined carbohydrates, which cause fluid retention.
Okay, so a different context entirely.
Entirely. In the context of setting a biological baseline for a high-performing brain, we have to look at electrical conductance. Sodium is the primary extracellular ion responsible for the generation of action potentials.
The electrical impulses your nerves use to communicate?
Exactly. If you restrict sodium while drinking large volumes of water, you blunt the electrical capacity of the nervous system.
So we need the salt to carry the current.
We do.
What about the magnesium? The sources highlighted magnesium specifically in the context of executive function and stress management.
Magnesium is arguably the most critical component of this toolkit for modern living. In the brain, magnesium acts as a physical modulator for NMDA receptors.
NMDA receptors, what do they do?
They are the primary excitatory receptors in the brain, activated by our old friend, glutamate.
Oh, right. The toxic exhaust.
Yes. When you are stressed, overwhelmed, or under high cognitive load, these NMDA receptors can become hyperexcited. They open up, allowing massive amounts of calcium to flood into the neurons, leading to anxiety, jitteriness, and sympathetic nervous system overdrive.
The excitotoxicity we talked about in the Paris study.
Exactly. Now, here is the mechanical magic of magnesium. A magnesium ion actually sits physically inside the channel of the NMDA receptor.
Like a cork in a bottle.
Yes, it acts as a literal physical plug, a brake pad. When the receptor tries to open from mild stress, the magnesium block prevents the calcium from flooding in. It stops the excessive firing, keeping the nervous system calm and regulated.
So taking magnesium isn't just some holistic wellness trend. It is literally installing a biological brake pad in my brain to physically block an anxiety spiral at the cellular level.
You are providing the physical hardware your nervous system requires to downregulate itself. You cannot talk yourself out of a panic attack if you lack the magnesium ions to plug the NMDA receptors.
Okay, this is really coming together. The engine is rested and cleared of waste from sleep. It is lubricated and electrically charged from precise hydration.
The machine is primed.
But we still have to manage how we drive this machine throughout the day. We have a finite fuel tank, which leads us to the final and perhaps most paradigm-shifting structural component. Tool 3, movement and cognitive pacing.
This requires us to completely redefine the purpose of movement. Modern society has framed exercise almost entirely around aesthetics, calorie burning, and weight loss.
We have to strip all of that away.
Completely. In the context of engineering a biological baseline, movement is exclusively a tool for nervous system regulation and cognitive support.
The sources outline a very specific threshold for this: 20 minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity, or MVPA. Why is 20 minutes the magic number?
Because that is the precise neurobiological threshold required to trigger a massive release of BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor.
What does BDNF actually do? I've heard it called miracle grow for the brain.
That's exactly what it is. It acts as a highly potent fertilizer.
Yeah.
BDNF promotes the survival of existing neurons, encourages the growth and differentiation of new synapses, and is absolutely critical for neuroplasticity.
So it upgrades the hardware.
It does. Clinical studies show that crossing that 20-minute MVPA threshold significantly improves working memory, inhibitory control, and information processing speed for hours afterward. It is an executive function reset button.
But let me play devil's advocate here for a second. What if I'm already profoundly stressed? What if I'm in that HTA axis hijack state, flooded with cortisol, dealing with a massive crisis at work?
That's a very common scenario.
Right. Doing a vigorous 20-minute HIIT workout might just dump more stress hormones into an already overflowing system, wouldn't it?
That is a highly astute observation, and it's a trap many high performers fall into. If your allostatic load, your total cumulative burden of chronic stress, is maxed out, vigorous exercise becomes a stressor, not a relief.
It backfires.
Totally. In that state, the baseline protocol shifts from MVPA to micro-movements.
What constitutes a micro-movement?
5 to 10 minutes of intentional, light, rhythmic movement. A brisk walk around the block, gentle stretching, or mobility work.
Just keeping it light.
Right. The physiological goal here is not to burn calories or build muscle. The goal is to stimulate the vagus nerve.
The primary nerve of the parasympathetic system, the rest and digest system.
Yes. Gentle rhythmic movement physically signals safety to the brainstem. It increases vagal tone, which actively pulls the autonomic nervous system out of fight, flight, or freeze states.
And helps process circulating stress hormones out of the bloodstream.
Exactly. It's a physiological reset.
So movement is a dial we use to tune the nervous system. But what about the cognitive side of our day? Even if I sleep perfectly, hydrate with electrolytes, and manage my vagal tone, my job still demands constant heavy thinking.
Of course.
I can't just go for a walk every time I have to write a report. This is where the concept of cognitive pacing absolutely blew my mind.
This is perhaps the most crucial takeaway from all our sources.
The sources draw heavily on clinical insights from occupational therapists managing post-viral conditions. Specifically, long COVID and ME/CFS, or myalgic encephalomyelitis chronic fatigue syndrome.
Yes.
The data from these patient populations is incredibly revealing for everyday healthy individuals. What did the clinical management of chronic fatigue teach us about normal brain function?
It highlighted a fundamental, undeniable truth. Mental energy is a finite biological currency. Every thought, every emotional regulation, every screen you look at requires ATP, the cellular energy molecule.
We call physical energy.
And the clinical data shows that cognitive exertion, just thinking hard, actually alters blood flow in the brain.
The studies on cerebral hypoperfusion.
Yes. Researchers use transcranial Doppler ultrasounds to monitor blood flow in the brain during cognitive tasks. They found that in patients experiencing fatigue, cognitive exertion caused a massive drop in cerebral blood velocity.
Oh, massive.
We were talking about drops of 26% to 29% in blood flow to the brain just from trying to concentrate.
A 29% drop in blood flow. The brain is literally choking on its own exhaust.
It is. When the brain doesn't get enough oxygen-rich blood, the neurons are forced to shift from efficient aerobic metabolism to incredibly inefficient anaerobic metabolism.
Anaerobic metabolism, that's what happens in my muscles when I sprint as hard as I can. Or
Exactly. And the byproduct of anaerobic metabolism in your muscles is lactic acid. It burns.
Are you saying my brain starts producing lactic acid when I think too hard?
That is exactly what happens. Anaerobic metabolism creates localized lactic acid and massive oxidative stress inside the skull.
Wow.
The subjective feeling of brain fog isn't a lack of focus. It is the physical sensation of neuroinflammation and cellular stress from anaerobic respiration.
That is staggering. The burn you get in your legs during a sprint is happening inside my prefrontal cortex during a 3-hour Zoom meeting.
Exactly.
So how do the occupational therapists treat this in the clinic?
They utilize a strict protocol called the 50% rule, which is a cornerstone of cognitive pacing.
Break down the 50% rule for me.
You find your absolute cognitive maximum for a given task. Let's say you have to write a complex strategy document.
Okay, writing a document.
You know from experience that your absolute limit, the point where your focus shatters, you get a headache and you start making typos, is 90 minutes.
Sounds about right.
Under the clinical 50% rule, you are only allowed to use 50% of that maximum capacity. You must stop working at 25 minutes regardless of how you feel.
Okay, I have to stop you there. Stopping at 50% capacity sounds beautiful in a clinical lab setting. But in a corporate job, with a boss who wants the report by 5 p.m., if I stop at 45 minutes and say, sorry, I'm pacing my ATP, I'm getting fired.
It's a very real tension, yes.
How does a normal person actually apply this without ruining their career?
It requires a paradigm shift in how we view productivity. It is not slacking. It is biological preservation for long-term output.
Okay, explain the biological math there.
The reason you must stop at 50% is that you have to leave reserve energy for your body's autonomic baseline functions. Your body needs massive amounts of ATP just to regulate your immune system, digest your food, and repair cells.
So if I spend it all on the report...
If you push your cognitive battery to 100% on that spreadsheet, you have zero energy left for baseline homeostasis.
And what happens if I do push to 100%? Because we all do it. Deadlines happen.
When the ATP is gone, but the environmental demand remains, like your boss still wants the report, your nervous system panics. It floods your body with adrenaline and cortisol just to keep you upright.
The emergency backup generator.
Yes. You enter a state clinicians call wired and tired. You feel jittery, anxious, and deeply exhausted at the same time.
I know that feeling intimately.
You are running on emergency stress hormones, which guarantees a severe multi-day biological crash later. You will lose more productivity over the next 3 days than you gained in those extra 45 minutes. We must meticulously manage what occupational therapists call the energy envelope.
The energy envelope.
Exactly.
And part of managing that energy envelope is reducing the constant invisible drains on our ATP. The sources call this cognitive scaffolding.
Because holding things in your working memory, trying to remember to buy milk, trying to remember your 2 p.m. meeting, it burns continuous metabolic energy.
It's like leaving apps open in the background of your phone.
Precisely. You had to offload that mental burden to the physical environment.
Building an external brain. Using physical whiteboards. Setting automated alarms on your phone for every transition. Laying out your clothes and packing your bag the night before.
Yes. You are spending a tiny amount of energy to build the scaffolding so your internal brain doesn't have to burn glucose running background processes all day.
It makes so much sense when you frame it as ATP preservation. Which brings us to the final and most radical concept in cognitive pacing. When you have hit your 50% limit, how do you recover? We have to talk about aggressive resting. This was a huge wake-up call for me because when I quote-unquote rest after a long work block, I usually lie on the couch and scroll through Twitter or watch a YouTube video or, listen to a podcast.
Which is absolutely not resting. Not neurologically.
Not even close. The clinical data points out that scrolling social media is an incredibly high sensory input activity. Your brain is processing rapid visual changes, deciphering text, processing audio, and reacting to micro-emotional triggers from the content. That requires massive computational power.
You are shifting from the task-positive network in your brain to another highly active network, but you are not downregulating. True rest, aggressive resting, is treating yourself like a sensory deprivation chamber.
What does aggressive resting actually look like in practice?
It is lying flat in a dark, quiet room, no screens, no podcasts, no music, no books. You use an eye mask if necessary. You reduce visual and auditory sensory input to absolute zero for 15 to 20 minutes.
So it's not a nap?
No, this is not a nap. You are awake. But it is a medical intervention. You are removing the environmental demands so the brain can stop processing, the lactic acid can clear, and the neuroinflammation can physically cool off.
I think that is the biggest takeaway for people living in the modern digital age. We aren't actually resting anymore. We are just constantly changing the flavor of our cognitive load.
That's a brilliant way to phrase it.
We move from the stress of an Excel sheet to the stress of a doom scroll. We have to give the prefrontal cortex actual profound silence to reboot.
It is an absolute necessity. And with these 3 pillars, mastering sleep architecture to clear the glutamate, utilizing precise neurovascular hydration to maintain the electrical gradient, and implementing cognitive pacing and movement to manage the energy envelope. We have laid down the complete blueprint.
We have successfully engineered the biological baseline.
We really have.
Let's bring this all together. We have gone on an incredibly deep journey today. We started by completely debunking the toxic myth of willpower. We exposed it for what it truly is, a fragile, highly exhaustible, glucose-dependent battery in the prefrontal cortex that is constantly under threat of glutamate poisoning and structural failure.
And we saw how over-relying on that fragile battery leads inevitably to decision fatigue, massive cortisol spikes, HPA axis hijack, and the energy-saving trap of binary all-or-nothing thinking.
And to fix it, we learned the neuroscience of habit formation. We learned how to write automated macros into our deep brain, offloading our daily lives to the low-energy basal ganglia using cues, task bracketing, and choice architecture.
Moving from the expensive hardware to the cheap hardware.
Exactly. Finally, we laid down the non-negotiable structural tools required to run those macros, mastering adenosine clearance and circadian light exposure for sleep, balancing electrolytes to stop the brain from shrinking, and using the 50% rule to pace our finite ATP.
It is a total paradigm shift.
Mm-hmm.
We are moving from a psychology of endless motivation to a strict protocol of physiological engineering.
So, directly to you listening, I want you to go back to our broken down car from the very beginning of this deep dive. When your engine is smoking, you don't stand there and yell at it to be better. When you fail to maintain a habit, when you find yourself binge scrolling at midnight, or when you snap at your partner because you are so mentally exhausted.
Which happens to all of us.
Yes, it happens to all of us. I need you to realize that it is not a moral lapse. It is not a failure of your character or your spirit. It is a highly predictable mechanical failure of an overtaxed, underfueled biological system that has been pushed past its limits. Stop judging yourself and start fixing the baseline.
This raises an important question, something I hope you continue to reflect on as we close out today. If our entire society, our sprawling school systems, our rigid 9-to-5 corporate structures, our incredibly demanding digital landscapes, if they all stopped worshiping the false idol of infinite willpower, if instead we structured our daily lives and our institutions around the hard biological realities of glutamate clearance, circadian rhythms, and cognitive pacing, how much trapped human potential would we instantly unlock?
It's the strength to build anew. It's the light to guide you through. It's the choice to find your way. Starting here, starting today.
Let's be radically honest. If you finish this episode and simply decide to try harder tomorrow, your system will fail. Willpower is not a strategy. It is a finite battery located in your prefrontal cortex, and it will inevitably drain. We cannot rely on understanding alone. We must engineer the baseline. You need to stop testing your battery and start offloading these daily requirements to the automated engine of your basal ganglia. Establish your uncompromising biological foundations for sleep, hydration, and movement, so you no longer have to negotiate with a tired brain. Are you ready to stop running on empty motivation and start building an automated biological baseline? The Your Journey. Your Tools app contains the exact blueprints and diagnostic tools you need to automate your baseline and protect your nervous system. Download the app, www.yourjourney.yourtools.com. Be kind to yourself. You are doing better than you think, and I'll catch you on your journey.